Thank you. Can you see my screen?
Yeah, we can.
All right. So good morning, everyone. Inclusion is being inclusive, being an inclusive leader is something that's very important to me. I'm a mother of two Gen Z, one who feels she's more millennial than Gen Z, but of two Gen Z, I am a mentor to many more young girls. And I also say I'm a professional auntie. So I deal in this space a lot as a leadership executive and wellness coach. I deal not just with the systems that need changing in DEI and diversity, equity, and inclusion, but I also deal with the leader as a person. So that's why wellness is something that's very important for me. I believe wellness is important for leadership. So getting back to inclusion, when we speak of inclusion, we speak of ensuring a safe space where people have belonging, support, and respect. And so in an inclusive environment, every individual will feel valued and all voices are heard. So for me, being inclusive as a leader means at every stage of the job cycle, women or other marginalized communities are supported. This shows up in how and where the job is advertised, the language used in the recruitment process, how and why candidates are chosen, interviewed and shortlisted, how they are onboarded, how talent is developed, and eventually promoted or becomes part of a succession plan. At any point, there can be issues of inclusion or lack thereof. And as we know, we've spoken, if you've seen some of the reports from McKinsey and Co., which does more of, it is an American research organization, but it does give us a benchmark to understand. And I really hope that soon African, as we build our literature on leadership, we will have more statistics for the African situation. But it talks a lot about the different things that happen to women, whether it's the broken corporate ladder rung, whether it's women trying to break the glass ceiling, or whether it's women finding themselves out on glass cliffs, as they call them, where, you know, a situation where a minority or woman is in that they can't win. And often this is done when there's been a big scandal, then they bring in someone to take over. And unfortunately, there's no way they can win in that situation. And so that's around the space that I talk a lot about and deal with a lot of the ladies a lot of the women that I coach and mentor. We also talk a lot about microaggressions and micro exclusions. So let's start off here. So when I got the call, when I got the message back that I could present today, I sat and I thought about what is inclusive leadership, you know, because we had said that the title was going to be strategies for inclusive leadership. So I was like, okay, so what is inclusive leadership? And so inclusive leadership is going to counter discrimination, bias, and favor based on ethnicity, race, gender, sexual orientation, age, social economic background, religion. And we know in Africa, then there's also tribal issues, which city you're from. And, you know, there's much more categories that we can put there. So when I was looking at inclusive leadership, I saw inclusive leaders as leaders that support effective decision-making, diverse talent, and collaboration. Why is this important? Well, it motivates and drives teams towards individual and shared success. Leaders who tend to effectively leverage their team's diverse ideas, experiences, and thoughts and perspectives do so to the benefit of their companies. Businesses that employ inclusive leaders are often likely to attract and keep highly qualified talent, develop creative solutions, and find ways to appeal to and benefit to diverse consumer markets. In the past few years, McKinsey and Co. they do a survey called Women in Business. And one of the things they noticed is what they called the Great Resignation. So in the United States and especially around the world, there's been a lot of women leaving their corporate jobs. And the reason for doing that is the microaggressions and the micro exclusions, not feeling included in the processes that are important to them. What women were finding is often the role of DEI was given to women. However, they were not being included in the decision making. So there's been a great resignation. One of the things that's also important about being an inclusive leader is that it requires commitment and vulnerability. Now, vulnerability in leadership for some people is a very novel idea, because if they're thinking of the vertical type of leadership that we'd see when we were growing up, whether it's and especially in Western literature, you're thinking of somebody of Winston Churchill or any Avengers superhero, is that vertical leadership, one person going off into battle and everybody following them. So obviously that type of person, a general or etc., couldn't be vulnerable, because if you were vulnerable, it meant that you're putting yourself or other people in danger. However, we're starting to see that, especially here on the African continent, and especially with African women, we tend to lead in a more collaborative manner. And the very things that we've been told are not good for us in the past, like that we're emotional. Our emotion is often things like empathy that are mistaken for being emotional. And empathy is important, even in negotiation, and empathy is important. If you don't understand where the other person is coming from, then how do you know, how are you able to effectively negotiate? And so vulnerability becomes important, because if you're showing up as a true and authentic person, people believe in you. And if people believe in you, people follow you. So that's where the vulnerability comes from. Oftentimes, people mistake vulnerability for being very verbose. If I tell you everything about me, what I did all weekend, everything that happened with my family, that's me being vulnerable. And that's actually not what this type of vulnerability is about. It's about authenticity, showing up as who you are, saying when you don't understand something, getting clarification, listening actively, etc. So some of the top traits of inclusive leaders. Well, inclusive leaders usually have strong soft skills that allow them to successfully integrate an inclusive type of management. I teach and train on a lot of soft skills and coach around soft skills. I actually now call them essential skills, because just the fact with emotional awareness is when you find a leader who doesn't, and I don't know how they lead in this day and age, but if you find somebody who wants to be a leader and they don't have emotional intelligence, it's very hard to deal with them, because it means, first off, they're not self-aware. They're also not regulating their own emotions and feelings, etc. And so then that spills over to how they lead. So some of the top traits of inclusive leaders is bias awareness. First thing, we've got to be aware that we have a bias, okay, and actively listen and encourage diverse ideas and ways of thinking. Equality needs to be a priority in our business decisions, our goals, our vision, and our relationships. Active listening. I always say active listening is listening to understand rather than listening to respond. Most of the time, the type of listening we're doing is we're already formulating in our brains what we're going to say back to the person. So we're missing a lot of the nuances, you know what I mean? Because you're in your head saying, wait, they said that, so I need to reply this way, rather than listening for understanding, where you're repeating back, where you're paraphrasing, etc. And so curiosity, that's another big part of being an inclusive leader. This motivates people because people feel that, you're listening to what it is that they say. And this helps to drive improvements, innovations, and other key results in the workplace. Constructive feedback. And this one for an inclusive leader is a two-way street. As much as leaders, we want to give out constructive criticism, we've got to be able to take it as well. And this helps to improve our approach. It helps us to course correct, and it helps with new management decisions and to consider changing, the changes that we can make in the terms of of the projects that we do, so that the work that we do is reiterative. It goes in constant cycles. And, once you correct one thing, you add it to the thing and you keep going, and we work in constant cycles where we change as we need to. Effective communication is another top trait of inclusive leaders. So one part of effective communication is that all team members should be able to offer input for others to consider. So it's not just about what we're saying, it's about giving everybody a voice. Empathy and compassion are important because we need to seek to understand others' perspectives, feelings, and ideas. The compassionate approach to communicating and working with others lets us consider all aspects of a problem. And this allows us to remain flexible with our team workers. So creative thinking allows people to provide unique and innovative ideas that are fundamental to the traits of inclusive leadership. Inclusive leaders are more likely to ask for input. They're also more likely to consider non-traditional ideas and approaches to things, to think, quote unquote, outside the box. And so the ability of an inclusive leader to think creatively and look for innovative solutions allows them to develop their strength as an inclusive leader. And finally, teamwork. And Dr. Carolyn spoke, it's next to last is teamwork. And Dr. Carolyn spoke about this in her amazing presentation. So I'll just do a small amount here, but teamwork is about collaboration and working with others, where all traits of inclusive leadership when directing and managing a group of professionals. Inclusive leaders, especially that work part of teams, learn to lead, delegate, and direct their teams in a manner where everybody is included. So the final thing is cultural knowledge. And I believe my predecessor, Vincent, spoke about this as well, about understanding. And so inclusive leaders are aware of and sensitive to their team's cultural diversity. It's important to find top talent and create innovative solutions and approach work with new ideas. So cultural knowledge allows us to recognize the cultural differences of others and find ways to adapt and embrace the diversity of the workplace. And another part of cultural knowledge is being able to move between various cultural settings and pay attention to the words and the experiences of others. So it's not necessarily that you're becoming a chameleon, but it's just when you're in a certain situation, this is the way I show up. And when you're in certain situations, this is the way I show up. This was something that was driven home for me as a former diplomat, because you have to adapt to the environment that you're in so that you can continue with the conversations. So inclusive language. When we talk about inclusiveness, sometimes we forget that it starts with what and how we say. Language is a very powerful tool. The words and the phrases that we use matter. I think if you sit and think back to your life, you may not remember maybe the times you were spanked, or disciplined or whatever, but you sure remember the time that a parent or a loved one looked at you and said, "I'm so disappointed." Those words hit. So language really matters. It's important that we recognize the importance of our words and the impact they hold. What we may just feel is nothing, whether it's misgendering someone or it's using the wrong type of language, we may feel it's nothing. It can be a huge dig to someone that causes a break in communication and eventually a break in the teamwork. So one of the key factors in developing and fostering diverse, equitable, and inclusive organizations is to promote the use of inclusive language. This inclusive language is language that aims to include everyone. It's free from biases, it's free from limitations, stereotypes, and other forms of social exclusivity. A safe and successful environment requires us to think about how others will absorb the language that we use. We can't just say something and say, "Oh, I was joking." That doesn't fly in 2024. Language And why is it important? It's important because language signifies acceptance. We want to make sure that everybody feels accepted, acknowledged, and respected. So let's look at some ways to make language more inclusive. One of the ways is for certain things, using what has become the norm is using gender neutral terms, such as rather than chairman or chairwoman, you say chairperson. The second thing is person first language. Person first language emphasizes the person before the disability. So you would say a person who is blind rather than a blind person. Neutral or preferred pronouns, what has become the norm is to say they, so that it's not offensive to anyone. Avoiding ableist or insensitive language. Ableist and insensitive language devalues people with a disability, suggesting that the person with the disability is abnormal, i.e., we've seen in recent times, it is impolite to call somebody retarded. It's a derogatory term that mocks individuals with intellectual disabilities, using their condition as an insult. So, as we said, language matters. So the final things I would say for inclusive leadership is we want to check our biases. We want to be aware of the assumptions that we have and strive to remain non-judgmental in our interactions with others. We want to remain open and positive during discussions, team meetings, and conversations, and commit to approaching things at work with positive intent to prevent or change behaviors or processes that are exclusionary. We want to engage passive team members, the ones who hide in a corner. We want to pull them out, engage the passive team members, and motivate them to feel confident and comfortable with giving input and feedback. We want to use creativity to learn. There's so many different ways. This is one of the amazing things about doing icebreakers before a meeting is it gets everybody in the room, everybody's relaxed, everybody has a chance to say something about themselves. So we need to create ways to learn about each other's differences, our cultural experiences and perspectives to foster an inclusive environment where everybody has the ability to provide insights and ideas. This is why team building exercises are really great, because it gives people a chance to know each other on another level. And then, as I said before, being vulnerable, provide team and individual feedback to help coach your team so they can develop more inclusive behaviors and methods of working together, and accept your personal vulnerabilities and allow others to see them. This sets an example for them. Be open to admitting your mistakes. This is a tough one as leaders, but it's important. Be open to seeing your blind spots and asking others for input. Once you understand your strengths very well, it's good to put people who are opposite of those on your team so that you're able to be a more well-rounded team rather than putting people exactly like you on the team. Find somebody who can bring something else to the team. And finally, mentor. Find a mentor or someone with more experience in managing diverse teams. Just as we support our team members, we should be supported in our leadership style. So we need to seek out other managers of people outside where we work, who we trust, and we can emulate their exclusive leadership behaviors and skills. And so as I've come to the end of my slides, I just want to say, I know we talked about this, and we also joke about this if you're in my generation, because I believe I'm Gen X. My daughter calls me a boomer, but I'm not a boomer. But we're Gen X. There's often a lot of discord between us and the Gen Zs. But one of the things that I have learned is I've learned more about inclusivity from the Gen Zs that I hang around with than I have from my own peers. So be willing to, even in your vulnerability, be willing to not just look for somebody your age mate, but also look and be around people who are more comfortable with this type of thing. And like I said, with Gen Z, they're very open, they're very used. There's so many things that my daughter used to say, Mom, you can't say that, or Mom, you can't do that. And now more and more, she's like, oh, okay, Mom, you become a much more open-minded. So I will leave you with that, and I thank you for listening to me today.